the Daltex building, Richard Kane in the depository, James Files in the grassy knoll, David Morales, we don't know, probably depository. Johnny Rosselli didn't shoot. He was just there to see everything was working fine. Now, there was an acoustic analysis of Dick DeBelt with you've heard this story, a motorcycle patrolman's radio was on. They studied it. They sent it out for 2 scientific investigations. The government said no, no, no. But it's likely there were 5 shots altogether, not 3. So with the Warren Commission having destroyed documents, altered documents, whitewashed this and that, we really can't trust evidence that has been supplied by the Warren Commission. If we grant that point, then we have to ask who actually did shoot Officer Tippit as Oswald was going towards the Texas Theater. So there are a number of theories. James Files, I asked him that, and he said, I refuse to say it. He knew who the shooter was, but he refused to say. He did not rat on his friends or associates while they were alive. That's probably why he stayed alive. But he said that this man had passed away, and one of his last wishes was that Files would not disclose it because it would have impacted his children. But someone leaked this information. And here's how the story goes. Files' friend, Gary Marlowe, tall, thin man. This is a picture of Files and Marlowe about 1963. They were from Chicago, a part of the Giancana gang. And Marlowe's job was to take out Oswald after the assassination, and he messed it up. He was stopped by Officer Tippit, executed Tippit, left town, and it didn't finish the job. And that later on fell to Jack Ruby to silence Oswald. So that's how that story goes. But there are a few stories. One lady was not interviewed by the Warren Commission. She heard the shots of Officer Tippit. She came outside. She saw what she saw. She was scared off from testifying. And this is what this lady saw and said.
Did you hear the shots?
Yes, I heard the shots.
And what did you do?
I ran out into the street and looked down the street, and I ran back down the street where he was lying, and I looked at him.
Now, when you heard the shots and you went out of the house, did you see a man with a gun?
Yes, I did.
What was he doing?
Oh, he was reloading it. When I said he was reloading his gun.
And how would you describe that man?
Well, he's kind of chunky. He's kind of heavy. He wasn't a very big man.
Was he tall or short?
Yeah, he's kind of short guy.
Short and heavy.
Yes. Well, they weren't together. They went this way from each other. The one done the shooting went this way. The other one went straight down past street that way.
What was the man who did not do the shooting, but the man who went in the other direction from the man with the gun? What was he wearing, if you remember?
Well, first I can remember he looked like light khakis and a white shirt.
And was he tall or short?
He was tall.
And was he heavy or thin?
He was thin.
But the one who had the gun, seconds after Tippit was shot, he was short.
Yes,
he was heavy.
Was short and kind of heavy.
Now, did you testify before the Warren Commission about this case?
I haven't said anything to anyone.
Did anyone come to see you after the murder of Officer Tippit?
Yes, he was a man came, I don't know what he was. He came to my house and talked to me. But I don't know what he looked like a policeman to me.
He did. Did he have a gun?
Yes, he wore a gun.
Mrs. Clemens, how long after Tippit was shot did this man with a gun come to visit you?
About 2 days. It was about 2 days. Said that I might get hurt. Someone might hurt me if I would talk.
About what you saw?
What I saw. He just told me to be the best if I didn't say anything because I might get hurt.
So there are a few candidates here. There's, of course, Gary Marlowe, the tall, thin one associated with the Files story. I discovered Milwaukee Phil, who was another person, kind of resembled a short, stocky man. He was a executioner for Giancana, and killed almost 14 people for the syndicate, murdered 14 people for the syndicate. His job was to keep an eye on Oswald. But in Giancana's book, he said that a CIA asset named Roscoe White, who became he was slipped into the Dallas Police Department before the assassination. And Giancana says it was Roscoe White who took out Tippit. So we don't have an answer to this question. We have suspects, and that's where we have to unfortunately leave it. But the question is, why did Oswald need to be killed? Why was this effort being made, and then it fell to Jack Ruby to do that? Well, let's take a look at the reasons. First, Oswald actually liked President Kennedy. He said, "Nothing irritated me about President John Kennedy. He had a nice family." He had a coffee table book about the Kennedys, he and Marina. He actually had remarked to a friend of his that he thought Kennedy was handsome and sincere compared to other kinds of politicians. No motive, no real motive. That's not going to look good in a trial. Secondly, he said he'd never been to Mexico except to Tijuana. Now, wait a minute, we can't have him testifying in court that he wasn't in Mexico City banging on the desks of the Cuban consulate and the Soviet embassy. That would not look good in court. Oswald was, after all, meeting with an FBI agent, DeBreeze, and had meetings with David Phillips, and having that come out in a trial would certainly be devastating to the government's case or to LBJ's case. Fourthly, Oswald actually had cooled on Marxism. He said, "The way you're treating me, I may as well be in Russia." That's not a nice thing for a Marxist, Leninist, socialist assassin to be saying. And then they asked him, "Would you like to hide your face?" as they were taking him from place to place. He said, "Why should I hide my face? I haven't done anything to be ashamed of."
Oswald walks his last mile. His assailant moves in from the right.
He's been shot. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot.
So Jack Ruby is tasked with the assignment. And shortly before Ruby's death, he died 3 years after this from a strange cancer. He admitted to his jailer that his job was to silence Oswald. And he did his job. Of course, the Warren Commission said he was just a nightclub owner and that he shot Oswald so that Jackie Kennedy wouldn't have to come to Dallas to testify in court. That sort of made it through all of the mainstream media, but what didn't make it through the mainstream media was that Jack Ruby was mafia all the way. He was a courier for Al Capone. He knew Al Capone. He had 9 prior arrests. He had made a whole bunch of long-distance calls to some of the biggest mafia figures in the 2 months before the assassination. His first visitor in prison was a mafiosi named Joseph Campisi. So Ruby's mafia record is amazing. Now, Ruby was in prison, and he actually indicted Lyndon Johnson and said, because he was the one who was going to arrange the trip, the only one who gained by the shooting. So there's an autopsy in Parkland Hospital, and then they take the body by force away from Dallas to Bethesda, where they're going to do an official autopsy. But the doctors and nurses at Parkland Hospital said they read the autopsy from Bethesda, and those wounds they describe in Bethesda were not the same as the wounds they saw in Parkland. And those are the medical professionals who said, no way. The story that came out of the official autopsy did not correspond to what they experienced in Dallas. Getting on to a few different subjects. These are different chapters in my book. Dorothy Kilgallen, a gossip columnist, scored an interview with Jack Ruby alone in his jail cell. Wow. And she said, "I got the scoop of the century. This is going to knock the socks off of everything we knew about the Kennedy assassination." She had a chapter. She showed it to her best friend, Florence Pritchard, and she was on television all the time. And she died in her bed, fully clothed, of barbiturate and alcohol poisoning. Her girlfriend, Florence Pritchard, died the same weekend. David Ferry was going to be indicted by the Attorney General of New Orleans, Jim Garrison, and the newspaper got hold of the fact that he was going to be charged with conspiracy to killed the President of the United States. He said, you know what that story does to me? I'm a dead man. From now on, believe me, I'm a dead man. You'll find out soon enough. You'll see. And within a very short time, David Ferrie allegedly committed suicide, left 2 suicide notes, but died of natural causes. A mysterious death. And his good buddy, Eladio Del Valle, an anti-Castro Cuban who said Kennedy should be killed, he died within 12 hours of David Ferrie. And these deaths keep piling up. Gary Underhill said, Oswald is a patsy. They set him up. It's too much. The bastards have done something outrageous. They've killed the president. I have been listening and hearing things. I couldn't believe they got away with it, but they did. Underhill told friends that he feared for his life. I know who they are. That's the problem. They know I know. That's why I'm here. I can't live in New York. He was killed shortly afterwards. Okay. James Worrell, who was on the motorcycle, died in a mysterious motorcycle accident at the age of 26. Bruce Pitzer was charged with taking films of the Bethesda autopsy. There were rumors that he might have kept a couple of slides for himself. He retired as a young man and then committed suicide. Mary Pinchot Meyer, Kennedy's mistress, read the Warren Commission document and said, this is outrageous. And she was thinking of going public. 10 days later, she was shot in the head and in the heart, arrested. I mean, nobody ever convicted. And there were a lot of people who were supposed to testify in the mid-70s in the House Select Assassinations Committee. Sam Giancana was subpoenaed to testify. The day before he testified, he was shot 6 times around the mouth. Silence is golden. And all those murders you see, look at the dates, between 1976 and 1978. Or most of these are mafiosi. Okay? So there were articles about, the odds are 1,000,000,000 to 1. There were about 70 people in the table of mysterious deaths. But I'm a social scientist, so I decided, let's look at it differently. Let's look at cause of death and calculate some probabilities. So if you look at the people in this sample, the number of suicides is 10 times greater than it happens in the normal population. The number of murders is 20 times greater than in the general population. Look at natural causes. The blue is the Kennedy sample. The number of people in the Kennedy sample who just died from natural causes it's ridiculously small. The odds are absolutely incredible that something funny is going on. Murder Incorporated is going on. Now, Jackie Kennedy believed that LBJ killed her husband and Robert Kennedy. Robert Kennedy said if the truth were known about Dallas, there would be blood in the streets. Roger Stone said LBJ had it done, mob, Hoover, all in on it. Okay, so that's how this picture emerged. And you'll get more substance and more detail and more flesh on the bones in the book. There's LBJ. He insisted on being sworn in on the plane on Texas soil. Yes, sir. And he was sworn in on the presidential aircraft. He commandeered the Air Force One right away. Albert Thomas is standing behind him. And this is the most revealing wink of the 20th century. He turns to Albert Thomas. Albert Thomas winks at LBJ. Job well done. Well, that photograph has been excised from the photographic library in the Johnson Library. So this is the whole picture, or pretty much the whole picture. LBJ on top, CIA next, William Harvey, critical person, dealing with Russelli, who connects them to the mafia. Okay? And the mafia gives us 3 assassins, Nicoletti, Files, and Kane. In the meantime, we have 2 CIA functionaries, David Phillips and Howard Hunt, and they're greasing the wheels in New Orleans and Dallas. We don't know exactly what Howard Hunt did, but he did something. And they set up Oswald. He writes his letter to Mr. Hunt saying, I need to know more about what's happening, what's going to happen, what's going down. Tell me more before actions are taken concerning my position. And Hoover is there. And Hoover is playing a major role in covering up all sorts of things, destroying documents and not looking at Jack Ruby and hiding the mafia, which had pictures of Hoover in compromising sexual positions. It's all in the book. So I would like to tell you 6 stories that made me say, I got to write another book, and made me say, I know that what I'm saying is right. These are the most important personal things. Now, I'm not a lawyer here adjudicating a case. These are things that really moved me to believe that this is all true. Okay, so these are the most meaningful stories to me, if I could have just a moment. The first is Oswald's Mr. Hunt letter concerning his position. That means Oswald was involved with something and he didn't know what it was about 16 days before he was murdered. That is really important information. Okay, and that certainly moved me. Secondly, the Sylvia Odio story. These ladies are not lying. They're still telling the same story 50 years later. They're not writing any books. He was there at their apartment with right-wing anti-Castro exiles talking about killing Castro. And who he's involved with and why, we don't know. But he is not just the lone assassin who's working in the depository, who gets up one morning and says, I think tomorrow I'll kill the president. He had associates. The third one is Hoover's telephone call to LBJ, where he says, there's a guy here in Mexico who calls himself Oswald, and it isn't Oswald. It's not his voice, and it's not his picture. Now that means Oswald's being set up in Mexico City. Regardless of what Gerald Posner and all these other folks say, it's coming out of Hoover's own mouth. There's an imposter setting Oswald up. Give me a break. Okay, those are meaningful stories. Now there are 3 more. The story of Eugene Dinkin and David Christensen, that to me, that moved me. These are 2 soldiers who hear CIA chatter about William Harvey, about Guy Bannister, about the assassination of the president, about it being blamed on a communist 3 weeks before it happened. Okay, that's amazing. And the fact that they didn't tell us that for 54 years is pretty incriminating, folks. Pretty incriminating. James Files, everybody says he's, not everybody, a lot of people say he's a liar. One guy said James Files was not even in Dallas. He was watching his daughter being born in a Chicago hospital. I wrote to Files, I said, what do you say about that? He said, that's absolutely true, except my daughter was born in 1966, not 1963. Ha! Okay, so I never caught him in a lie, but Files in 1940, this you haven't heard yet, so this is important. Another wow, the last wow. Files said Johnny Rosselli flew from Washington, D.C. to Dallas. Okay. Trump releases a document in November, and it says, and the FBI was following Rosselli. They said Rosselli flew from, I think I have this document here. Yeah, there you go. So this grainy document shows that Rosselli flew on a private aircraft with 2 call girls to Phoenix, and the next day they were going to Washington, D.C. So the FBI places Rosselli in Washington, D.C. on November 17th. Files says that Rosselli flew to Dallas from Washington, D.C. That is pretty accurate, James Files. Okay, he didn't know that the FBI, this is new information that we just got, okay, about Rosselli's travels. Files had it right on the button. Okay, Files is not lying. Now, the last document to me is very interesting. Jean Sutra's travel to the United States and Mexico, revealed after 54 years. Howard Hunt names a Corsican assassin hired by William Harvey. These are very, very convincing stories to me. If you have an open mind, you got to process this information. So here is my conclusion. All right. And it's very controversial, but this is the conclusion that I think any reasonable person would come to. President Johnson, aided and abetted by the CIA, conspired with and conscripted the American mafia to assassinate the President of the United States on November 22nd, 1963. The theory, if true, deeply undermines what common rank-and-file Americans believe. It violates every sacred canon that our country is transparent, open, democratic, civil, and governed by the rule of law. Instead, it portrays the United States of America as little short of a banana republic where power, guns, mobsters, murder, deceit, corruption, assassination, hitmen, and brazen coups d'etats determine the essential narrative of a people's history. That's the conclusion I would draw. So that's the end of the murder mystery. Everybody's dead. Almost everybody is dead. Jackie, Jack, Bobby, Jim Garrison, San Trafficante, Nicoletti, Giancana, David Ferry, Guy Bannister, William Harvey, Jack Ruby, all gone. All the major principals are gone, except one person. Okay, the person who is still alive is the man who murdered President Kennedy. James Files hit John Kennedy with a single frangible bullet from a distance of 35 meters, which he said was an easy shot, and hit him in the right front temple and killed him. He was in prison for the attempted murder of policemen. He got out on parole. He lives in Illinois. I believe he has an unlisted phone number, and I believe he's planning to get married. James Files, the man who murdered John F. Kennedy. Thank you very much for watching.